Today I am going to read chapters 7 and 8 in The Secret Garden. Chapter 7 is titled The Nest Building. The rain continued for another week. Unable to go out, Mary spent hours of every day with Colin in his room, talking and looking at his many splendid books. Sometimes Mary read things to Colin, and sometimes he read to her, but mostly they talked. Mary tried to be very cautious about the secret garden. She wanted to discover if Colin was the kind of boy you could tell a secret to. He was not in the least like Dickon, but he was evidently so pleased with the idea of a garden that no one knew anything about that she thought perhaps he could be trusted. Mary wondered if it might not be possible for Colin to actually visit the secret garden someday. Perhaps if he had a great deal of fresh air and knew Dickon and the robin and saw things growing, he might not think so much about dying. But there had already been a change in Colin since Mary had become his friend, though she did not know it. Before, not a day would go by without his throwing a tantrum or having a fit. Now it had been a week, and he had been almost pleasant the entire time. But what amazed Mrs. Medlock and the other servants most during this amazing week was the constant sound of laughter that burst forth from Colin's room. On the first morning when the sky was blue again, Mary wakened very early. She opened the window, and a great waft of fresh, scented air blew in upon her. "I can't wait," she cried. "I am going to see the garden." She put on her clothes quickly and ran to the garden, and there she found Dickon kneeling on the grass, already hard at work. "Oh, Dickon, Dickon," she called out, "how could you get here so early? The sun has only just come up." "Eh," he said, glowing, "I was up long before the sun. I couldn't have stayed away. Why, the garden was lying here waiting." The garden was full of wonders that morning. New green shoots pointing through the earth, swelling leaf buds on rose branches that had once seemed dead. Whole clumps of crocuses burst into purple and orange and gold, and in the midst of them was a wonder more delightful than all. The robin was building a nest. "He's like us," Dickon said in a hushed voice. "Us is near to being wild things ourselves. Us is nest building too." It was then that Mary told Dickon about Colin, about the midnight howling of the wind, and the far-off cries, and the small, ivory-white face, and the strange black-rimmed eyes. "Them's just like his mother's eyes, only hers was always laughing, they say," said Dickon, who had known about Colin from Martha. "They say Mr. Craven can't bear to see him when he's awake because his eyes is so like his mother's." "Do you think he wants to die?" whispered Mary. "No, but he wishes he'd never been born. Mother says that them is not wanted scarce ever thrives. His father would like to forget he's on earth. For one thing, he's afraid he'll look at him some day and find he's growed hunchback." "Colin's so afraid of it himself that he won't sit up," said Mary. "If he was out here," Dickon said, "he wouldn't be watching for lumps to grow on his back. He'd be watching for buds to break on the rose bushes, and he'd likely be healthier." Mary agreed. "I wonder if we could bring him out here without anyone seeing us," she said. "Us'll have him out here sometime for sure," said Dickon stoutly. "I could push his carriage well enough. He could lie out under the trees." "He'd be like us then," Mary said. "Eh," said Dickon, "two lads and a lass just looking on at the springtime, watching a garden grow." They found a great deal to do that morning, and Mary was late in returning to the house. She was also in such a hurry to get back to her work that she quite forgot Colin until the last moment. "Tell Colin that I can't come and see him yet," she said to Martha. "I'm very busy." Martha looked rather frightened. "Miss Mary," she said, "it may make him angry when I tell him that." But Mary was not as afraid of him as other people were. "I can't stay," she answered. "Dickon's waiting for me," and she ran away. When she returned late that afternoon, she found Colin lying flat on his back in bed. Mary marched up to him, her lips pinched tightly together. "Why didn't you get up?" she demanded. "I did get up this morning when I thought you were coming," he answered without looking at her. "I made them put me back in bed this afternoon. My back ached and my head ached and I was tired. Why didn't you come?" "I was with Dickon," said Mary. Colin frowned. "I won't let you see that boy if you go and stay with him instead of coming to talk to me," he said. Mary had no patience with Colin's sulking. "If you send Dickon away, I'll never come into this room again," she retorted. "You'll have to if I want you," said Colin. "I won't," said Mary. "I'll make you," said Colin. "They shall drag you in." Then great angry words flew between them. Each accused the other of being most selfish. "I'm not as selfish as you because I'm always ill and I'm sure there is a lump coming on my back," said Colin, "and I am going to die besides." "You're not," contradicted Mary unsympathetically. He opened his eyes quite wide with indignation. He had never heard such a thing said before. "I'm not," he cried. "I am. You know I am. Everybody says so." "I don't believe it," said Mary sourly. In spite of his invalid back, Colin sat up in bed in quite a healthy rage. "Get out of the room," he shouted, and he caught hold of his pillow and threw it at her. "I'm going," she said, "and I won't come back." That night Mary was awakened by the most dreadful noises. Colin was having a tantrum. "I felt the lump, I felt it," he choked out when Mary entered his room. "I know I should. I shall have a hunch on my back, and then I shall die." And he turned on his face and sobbed and sobbed. And here's a picture of Mary and Colin. "Stop it," Mary said fiercely. "You didn't feel the lump. All that ails you is hysterics and temper." "Nurse," she commanded, "come here and show me his back this minute." The nurse, Mrs. Medlock, and Martha had been standing huddled together near the door, staring at her, their mouths half opened. The nurse came forward almost as if she were afraid. "Show her," Colin gasped out between sobs. "She'll see then." It was a poor thin back to look at when it was bared. There was just a minute's silence. Even Colin tried to hold his breath while Mary looked up and down his spine. "There's not a single lump there," she said at last. "There's not a lump as big as a pin, except backbone lumps, and you can only feel them because you're thin. If you ever say there's a lump again, I shall laugh." No one but Colin himself knew what effect those crossly spoken words had on him. If he had ever had anyone to talk to about his secret terrors, if he had had childish companions, and had not lain on his back in the huge closed house, he would have found out that most of his fright and illness were created by himself. And now that an angry, unsympathetic little girl insisted that he was not as ill as he thought, he actually felt as if she might be speaking the truth. "Do you think I could live to grow up?" he asked. "You probably will if you don't give way to your temper," said the nurse, "and if you stay out a great deal in the fresh air." Weak and worn out with crying, Colin put his hand toward Mary, and her own anger having passed, she met him halfway with her hand, so that it was a sort of a making up. "I'll go out with you, Mary," he said. I shan't hate fresh air if we can find—" He remembered just in time to stop himself from saying, "if we can find the secret garden." And he ended, "I shall like to go with you and Dickon. If Dickon will come and push my chair." The nurse remade the tumbled bed and straightened the pillows. Then she made Colin a cup of tea and gave a cup to Mary, who really was very glad to get it after her excitement. "I will stay with him until he goes to sleep," Mary said to the yawning nurse. "You can go if you like." The nurse was out of the room in a minute, and as soon as she was gone, Colin pulled Mary's hand again. "I almost told," he said, "but I stopped myself in time. Oh, Mary, if I could get into the garden, I think I should live to grow up. Do you suppose you could tell me again what you imagine it looks like inside? I am sure it will help me go to sleep." "Yes," answered Mary. "Shut your eyes." He closed his eyes and lay quite still, and she held his hand and began to speak very slowly and in a very low voice. "I think it has been left alone so long that it has grown all into a lovely tangle. I think the roses have climbed and climbed and climbed, and now they hang from their branches and walls and creep over the ground, almost like a strange gray mist. Some of them died, but many are alive. And when the summer comes, there will be curtains and fountains of roses. I think the ground is full of daffodils and snowdrops and lilies and irises working their way out of the dark. Now the spring has begun. Perhaps there are clusters of purple crocuses. Perhaps the leaves are beginning to break out, and the gray is changing, and a green veil is creeping over everything. And the birds are coming to look at it because it is so safe and still, and perhaps the robin has found a mate and is building a nest. And Colin fell asleep. Chapter 8. I Shall Live Forever. Mary had her hat on when she appeared in Colin's room the next morning. He was in bed, his face painfully white. I'm glad you came, he said. I ache all over because I'm so tired. Are you going somewhere? I won't be long, she replied. I'm going to Dickon, but I'll come back, Colin. It's something about the garden. Oh, is it? He cried out. I dreamed about it all night. I'll lie and think about it until you come back. In 5 minutes, Mary was with Dickon in their garden. When she told him of the previous night's events, she could see that he felt sorrier for Colin than she did. He looked up at the sky and all about him. Just listen to them birds, he said. Come springtime, it seems as if all the world is calling. And that poor lad lying shut up and seeing so little that he gets to thinking of things that sets him screaming. We must get him out here. We must get him soaked through with sunshine, and we mustn't lose no time about it. Yes, agreed Mary. When I go back to the house, I'll ask him if he would let you come to see him tomorrow morning. And then, in a bit, when there's more leaves out, we'll get him to come out to the garden and we'll show him everything. The garden had reached the time when every day and every night it seemed as if magicians were passing through it, drawing loveliness out of the earth and the branches with wands. It was hard to go away and leave it all, but Mary went back to the house, and when she sat down close to Colin's bed, he began to sniff the air. What is it you smell of? He asked quite joyously. It's cool and warm and sweet all at the same time. It's the wind from the moor, said Mary. It's the springtime and the out of doors and the sunshine. Oh, Colin, she said, I have something to tell you. What is it? Colin held his breath. Dickon will come to see you tomorrow morning if you like, and he'll bring his creatures with him, the animals that he's made tame and that are his friends. Oh, Colin cried out in delight. But that's not all, Mary went on. The rest is better. There's a door into the garden. I found it. Oh, Mary, Colin said with a half sob. Shall I see it? Shall I live to get into it? Of course you'll see it, snapped Mary indignantly. Of course you'll live to get into it. Don't be silly. And so she was so unhysterical and natural that he came to his senses and began to laugh at himself. A few minutes afterward, she was telling him not what she imagined the secret garden to be like, but what it really was. And Colin's aches and tiredness were forgotten, and he was listening, enraptured. Later that morning, Colin told his doctor, I'm going out in my chair in a day or two. If it's fine, I want some fresh air. I thought you did not like fresh air, said the doctor. I don't when I'm by myself, replied Colin, but my cousin is going out with me. And the nurse, of course, suggested the doctor. No, I will not have the nurse. A boy I know will push the carriage. The doctor looked rather alarmed. He must be a strong boy and a steady boy, he said, and I must know something about him. Who is he? What is his name? It's Dickon, Mary spoke up suddenly. Oh, Dickon, said the doctor. If it's Dickon, you will be safe enough. He's as strong as a moor pony as Dickon. And so it was settled that Colin would, in a few days' time, leave his dark, musty room and go out of doors. That night Colin slept without once awakening, and when he opened his eyes in the morning, he lay still and smiled without knowing it. Smiled because he felt so curiously comfortable. It was actually nice to be awake, and he turned over and stretched his limbs luxuriously. He felt as if tight strings that had held him had loosened themselves and let him go. Suddenly Mary burst into the room, bringing with her a waft of fresh air, full of the scent of morning. It has come, she cried. The spring has come. Has it? Said Colin. Open the window. Perhaps we may hear golden trumpets. Mary was at the window in a moment, and in a moment more it was wide open, and freshness and scents and bird songs were pouring through. That's fresh air, she said. Lie on your back and draw in long breaths of it. That's what Dickon does when he's lying on the moor. He says he feels it in his veins, and it makes him strong, and he feels he could live forever. Forever and ever does it make him feel like that, said Colin, and he did as she told him, drawing in deep, long breaths over and over again until he felt that something quite new and delightful was happening to him. Mary was at his bedside again. Things are crowding up out of the earth, she ran on in a hurry. There are flowers uncurling and buds on everything, and the rose bushes look as wick can be. And when she paused for a breath, They heard a clumping sound as if someone wearing thick, clumsy boots were walking through the long corridors outside the room. All at once the door opened and Martha appeared. "Dickon and his creatures have come," she announced. Dickon came in smiling his nicest wide smile. A newborn lamb was in his arms, and a little red fox trotted by his side. A squirrel sat on his left shoulder and a crow on his right, and the head and paws of a second squirrel were peeking out of his coat pocket. Colin sat up slowly and stared and stared. In spite of all he had heard, he had not in the least understood what this boy would be like, and that his creatures would seem almost to be a part of himself. Colin had never talked to a boy before in his life, and he was so overwhelmed by his own pleasure, this is a long chapter, and curiosity that he did not even think of speaking. But Dickon did not feel the least shy or awkward. "This little fox cub is named Captain," he said, rubbing the little reddish animal's head, "and this crow here's Soot, and the squirrels they're Nut and Shell." Then he walked over to Colin's sofa and put the newborn lamb quietly on his lap. And then there was no wondering what to say. Questions poured forth, and Dickon answered them all. He told them how he had found the lamb just as the sun was rising 3 mornings ago. And as he talked, Soot flew in and out of the open window and cawed remarks about the scenery, while Nut and Shell ran up and down the trunks of the big trees outside and explored their branches. Captain curled up near Dickon, who sat on the hearth rug. They looked at pictures and gardening books, and Dickon knew all the flowers by their country names and exactly which ones were already growing in the secret garden. "I'm going to see them," cried Colin. "I'm going to see them." "Ay, that thou must," said Dickon, "and thou mustn't lose no time about it." But they were obliged to wait more than a week, because first there came some very windy days, and then Colin was threatened with a cold. Almost every day Dickon came in to talk about what was happening on the moor and in the garden. Most absorbing, however, were the preparations to be made before Colin could be transported in secrecy to the garden. As each day passed, Colin had become more and more fixed in his feeling that the mystery surrounding the garden was one of its greatest charms. Nothing must spoil that. No one must ever suspect that they had a secret. No one must see the wheelchair and Dickon and Mary after they turned a certain corner of shrubbery and entered the walk outside the ivied walls. One day Colin sent for Mr. Roach, the head gardener. "Oh, you are Roach, are you?" said Colin grandly. "I sent for you to give you some very important orders." "Very good, sir," answered Roach, staring in amazement. The young master was neither in bed nor on his sofa. He was sitting in an armchair, and a young lamb was standing by him, shaking its tail, as Dickon knelt and gave it milk from its bottle. A squirrel was perched on Dickon's bent back, attentively nibbling a nut. The little girl from India was sitting on a big footstool, looking on. "I'm going out in my chair this afternoon," said Colin. "If the fresh air agrees with me, I may go out every day. When I go, none of the gardeners are to be anywhere near the long walk by the garden walls. I shall go out about 2 o'clock, and everyone must keep away until I send word that they may go back to their work." "Very good, sir. You have my permission to go, Roach," Colin said, waving his hand. "But remember, this is very important." "Caw-caw," remarked the crow hoarsely, but not impolitely. "It's all safe now," said Colin, smiling after the gardener had left, "and this afternoon I shall see it. This afternoon I shall be in it." A little before 2 o'clock, the strongest footman in the house carried Colin downstairs and outside and put him in his wheelchair, near which Dickon waited. As Dickon pushed the chair along, Mary walked beside it, and Colin leaned back and lifted his face to the sky. The wind swept in soft, big breaths down from the moor, and was strange with a wild, clear, scented sweetness. Colin kept lifting his thin chest to draw it in. Not a human creature was to be sighted in the paths they took. They wound in and out among the shrubbery and out around the fountain beds, following their carefully planned route for the mere mysterious pleasure of it. But when at last they turned into the long walk by the ivied walls, the excited sense of an approaching thrill made them begin to speak in whispers. "This is where I used to walk up and down and wonder," said Mary, "and this is where the robin flew over the wall." "Is it?" cried Colin. "Oh, I wish he'd come again." "And that," said Mary with solemn delight, "is where he perched on the little heap of earth and showed me the key. And this is the ivy that the wind blew back," and she took hold of the hanging green curtain. "Oh," gasped Colin, and here is the handle, and here is the door. Dickon, push him in quickly. And Dickon did it with one strong, steady, splendid push. But Colin had actually dropped back against his cushions, and he had covered his eyes with his hands until they were inside and the chair had stopped and the door was closed. Not till then did he take them away and look around and around as Dickon and Mary had done. And over walls and earth and trees and swinging sprays and tendrils, the fair green veil of tender little leaves had crept. Everywhere were splashes of gold and purple and white, and the trees were showing pink and snow above his head, and there were flutterings of wings and faint sweet pipes and humming and scents, and the sun felt warm upon his face like a hand with a lovely touch. And in wonder, Mary and Dickon stood and stared at him. Suddenly he looked different. A pink glow of color had actually crept all over them, ivory face and neck and hands and all. I shall get well, he cried out. Mary, Dickon, I shall get well, and I shall live forever.